Now that we've learned all about CSS, it's time to apply all of this new knowledge in a small project. We're going to be making a simple site about surfing. The homepage will have a title, some navigation, several blog posts, photos, and a sidebar. This is what the final site will look like once we're done with it. Because we're focusing on CSS, we're going to start out with some HTML. If you want to follow along and you haven't downloaded the code already, I would suggest that you do so now. Now, here is the plain HTML version of what the site looks like before any CSS has been applied. The final site may not look very fancy, but when you see the plain HTML here, it should give you an idea of how far we have to go in order to make this plain text look like a visually structured website. So let's switch over to the code. The HTML is pretty simple, and there's just a few key features I'd like to point out to you. First, we have a wrapper div here, which you've already seen, and we'll use CSS to style. We have a header here, which just contains the title of the site and a subtitle. We have some navigation as an unordered list. And we have a div containing all the content of the site, including all of the blog posts, their titles, images, etc. And down at the bottom here, we have our sidebar with a few sections. Now that you're a bit more familiar with the HTML, we can move on to the CSS. In past projects, we've started out with some basic CSS, but in this project, we're going to start from scratch. Now, first things first, we should create a special type of comment here called a flag that we'll reuse later to mark major sections of our CSS code. So let's go ahead and create our flag here now. So I'm just going to make a slash with a bunch of stars, and I will copy and paste that down to the next line, close it off and get rid of that slash there. And we're going to call this page styles, because these are styles that are going to affect the entire page. Now, first, there's some things I'd like to apply to the body. So we'll select our body tag, and we'll remove the margin. We'll give it a background here. Have a very specific color picked out. And we have a background image, which I'll type out the path here now. And we want this to repeat X. More on that in a second. I want to set the font family. And we want to reduce the font size because this particular font I'm using is a bit large by default. Now, like I said, on the body tag, it's important to zero out the browser's default margin that gets applied. Otherwise, our pages won't run right up against the edge of the browser window, which is what we want. The background property here with the repeat X is actually a neat trick you can use to create gradient backgrounds. The image I'm using is just 1 pixel wide, but it's many pixels tall. By using the repeat X value, you can stretch that 1 pixel wide gradient across the entire page. So let's go ahead and switch back to our browser and refresh. And so far so good. Now we want to center all of our content on the page and restrict it to about 960 pixels so that it fits onto monitors that are at a resolution of 1024 by 768. And that is what the wrapper div is for. So let's switch back to our code and select our wrapper div. And we'll give it a width of 960 pixels. And this margin here is kind of interesting. By giving the wrapper a margin of auto on the left and right sides, it will automatically center itself and anything nested inside of it. So if we switch back and refresh, you can see that our content is now centered, and we can start getting into some more specific styling. I want to apply some line height to our paragraphs, and also black text on a white background can be pretty harsh, so we also want to lighten up our paragraphs a bit. So let's switch back and we'll select all of our paragraphs and give them a line height of about 1.5 ems, and we'll just lighten up the color a little bit from black to a very dark gray. So when we switch back and refresh, you can see that things are looking pretty good. Now I'm going to show you a new selector that I haven't detailed previously called a pseudo class, in addition to a new property. So let's switch back to our text editor and we'll skip down a few lines here, and we'll go ahead and select our anchor tags and select their hover state. Now this pseudo class hover will only be active when our mouse is hovered over the element that's being selected. In this case, all the anchor tags or links on the page. The text decoration property has a few values, and by default, links are underlined. By setting text decoration to none, the underline will be removed. So when we hover over our links, the underline will disappear. So when we switch back and refresh, we can hover over our links and you can see that the underline goes away. The next thing that we should sort out is the navigation. Our navigation is an unordered list and it's currently arranged vertically. We want to use an unordered list to maintain semantic, well-structured HTML, but the navigation in our final design is horizontal. In order to make the navigation horizontal, we'll have to float each individual list item to the left and space them out appropriately using some margin. We also want to float the entire list to the right of the page. So let's do all that now. So we'll switch back to our text editor and we want to create a new flag here, which we will call navigation. Space that out a bit. And next thing we want to do is select our nav unordered list, and we want to remove all the padding on it because unordered lists have some padding by default. We'll float it to the right and we'll give it a top and bottom margin of about 40 pixels. Now we also want to float these list items, so let's do that. We'll float them all to the left. We'll space them out a bit. We'll increase their font size by 1.4 ems, and we'll make them bold. So when we switch back and refresh, this looks good, but you'll notice that we have one small problem. The dots that are next to unordered list items by default need to be removed. To do that, I'm going to show you a new property called list style. So we'll switch back to our text editor, and under our nav unordered list here, we'll say list style none. And when I switch back and refresh, you can see that those dots have disappeared. Setting list style on the unordered list to the value none will remove the bullets. Most browsers accept a few other list styles that allow you to change the look of the bullet points, such as the value square, but most of the time you'll just want to remove them. We've got the foundation CSS done. In the next video, we'll finish things up and fine-tune our styling.